Remember the 90s? That's when Fresh Energy was founded. Back then, coal-burning power plants supplied most of Minnesota's electricity, with utilities pushing hard to build more. Wind and solar were just a tiny fraction of our electricity mix, and our energy conservation efforts were confined to remembering to shut the refrigerator door. From the beginning, Fresh Energy set its sights on changing our energy system at scale. We not only supported people changing to high-efficiency light bulbs, we pushed through a law requiring efficient lights and exit signs across the state. We recognized that homegrown renewable energy could create jobs and build prosperity. With the 2007 Next Generation Energy Act and 2013 Solar Energy Standard, Fresh Energy and its partners shaped and drove policies harnessing the power of private markets to spur growth in renewables. All that work established Minnesota as a national clean energy leader. We have many reasons to be proud. So, where are we now? It's now more cost-effective to build new wind energy than it is to run a coal plant, and customers have affordable, renewable energy options. Wind and solar are multi-billion-dollar industries, and clean energy technician is now the fastest-growing job in our state. Xcel Energy has announced plans to close all of its remaining coal plants, and they've joined Governor Walz and top business leaders to stand up for carbon-free electricity. A movement is spreading across Lake Country, from farm fields to urban centers. People from all walks of life are seeing that they can and must be part of Minnesota's clean energy future. But we're not done. Despite making huge progress on clean electricity, overall emissions in Minnesota and the Midwest are on the rise because cars, buildings, and other areas of our economy still use too much oil and gas. In fact, if the Midwest was its own country, we would be the 6th largest carbon emitter in the world, just below Russia. Fresh Energy is working hard on solutions for the next chapter of Minnesota's story. Our team of attorneys, scientists, communicators, economists, and policy experts are working to make 100% carbon-free electricity a reality in the state. Move our cars and buildings off of oil and gas, usher in the next generation of energy conservation, and ensure the transition to clean energy includes equity and access for all. What does the future hold? You can help write the next chapter. Fresh Energy is here to make the change we need, but we can't do it without you.
What can we do? What should we do? Really in a fix, caught in the middle of a dreadful carbon mix. But God has given each of us the skill to do what each one must, to care for what He doesn't trust, a world that's full that we can share. So open up your heart to the task at hand. Sing along with the song as we cherish the land. All nature yearns for you to renew the covenant of care for this home we share. There really are a lot of things that we can do today, hand in hand together in the most respectful way. Enrich the soil, clean the air, protecting water everywhere. If each of us would do our share, this home we can repair. So open up your heart to the task at hand. Sing along with the song as we cherish the land. All nature yearns for you to renew this covenant of care for this home we share. So open up your heart to the task at hand. Sing along with the song as we cherish the land. All nature yearns for you to renew the covenant of care for this home. Wherever you may roam, a home that we all can share. My name is... I'm tall. Is it on? I think it's on. It's on, isn't it? I'm going to take it this way. My name is Chris Erickson. I'm with InterFaith Creation Care, and I'm just going to give a few directions here. I'm going to save the welcome for Pastor Sandy. I don't want to steal her fire. But for those of you that are new to church, there are bathrooms and drinking fountains behind the stairway, both on this floor and the one up above. So, in case you need to do that. This event is sponsored by InterFaith Creation Care South Metro, an ecumenical coalition of green teams from many churches in the South Metro area. We believe that people of faith have a special place in caring for the earth because of our relationship with God the Creator, and to each other as we seek to care for the marginalized and the vulnerable, as though we were caring for Christ Himself. At the same time, we acknowledge the distress we all have felt in not knowing what we can do to make a difference. This sense of helplessness can rob us of the hope and energy to do even what is easily within our grasp. We hope that what you hear today will renew your willingness to take the next step in your journey together, in our journey together to care for the earth, our home. And there's a part here that I see that we didn't do this. I'm going to eliminate this part. Okay. But I would say our intention as you entered in was to have a piece of paper to write down what your concerns were. I don't know if did we do that?
Yeah, we did. Some people.
Some people did. So we have. So if anybody has what the intent was to write something down that you're concerned about, and then we would feed those up to Bill so that he can be attentive to each one. But more than that, our intent is to lift those up to God, who cares for you and who cares about what you're concerned about. Before you leave tonight, we hope that you will check out the information over the side tables about our initiative for electric school buses. And if you would like more information about what the InterFaith Creation Care has done and other resources that are helpful, we encourage you to check out our blog spot and sign up to receive our quarterly newsletter with notifications of future events and tons of information to support your stewardship of the earth. Our events are free, but we do appreciate any financial support you're willing to offer. And a free will basket is at the back to accept any gift toward those expenses, and we thank you in advance. Right now, I would like to introduce Pastor Sandy Rothschiller, one of our pastors here at Prince of Peace, for a welcome and a prayer.
Thank you, Chris. Well, it's great to see you all here tonight. When I got the email, actually I wasn't here. I got it when I got back. I was in Denver visiting my daughter and son-in-law, and my daughter works for a company that does renewable energy. And so it's always so fun to hear what she does. She was working on wind farms in Texas not too long ago, out in the middle of nowhere, and now she's in Denver. But it's really an exciting thing. We talked a lot about that. In fact, my husband and I were talking just today about how everyone does something different to help out our environment, to help out our creation. And if everybody just did a few things, I can't imagine the differences it would make. So don't ever get discouraged by just doing something that you can do, because everything we do does make a difference. So welcome on behalf of Prince of Peace. You're in our new space here. Isn't it lovely? It is so lovely. Now I was looking out there was a beautiful sunset out that window, so it's too bad that we have those shut, because oh my gosh, it was beautiful. So this is our new space, and welcome to it. I think you're one of the first groups that we've had in this space, so I feel very fortunate that it's for something this wonderful. So will you join me in prayer? Lord God, we thank you for your many good gifts, for the beauty of creation and its rich and varied fruits, for clean water and fresh air, for food and shelter, animals and plants. You created the world and gave it into our care, so that in obedience to you, we might serve all people. Inspire us to use the riches of creation with wisdom, and to ensure their blessings are shared by all people. Forgive us for the times we have taken the earth's resources for granted. So today we pray for an end to the waste and desecration of your creation. We pray that access to all of your creation will be shared equally among all people. We pray for communities and nations to find sustenance in the fruits of the earth and the water you have given us. So, Lord, transform our hearts and minds so that as we care and share, we touch the earth with gentleness and with love, respecting all living things. And we pray that the day would come when everyone has enough food and clean water. Help us to respect the rights of all people and all species as we willingly share your gifts with all creation. We pray this in your name. Amen.
Thanks, Pastor Sandy. Bill Middlecamp is a dear friend of mine who has a passion for caring for the earth. Bill has a Bachelor of Science degree in meteorology and a master's degree in computer science. He's also been trained as an earth keeper with the United Methodist Church. But it all has also received some special training in the program that he's going to present to us tonight. Without further ado, I want to turn it over to Bill.
Thank you, Chris. God gave the world to us to care for. Dr. Catherine Hayhoe likes to say, you don't have to read the whole Bible. Just read the beginning and the end. In the beginning, it says God created the world and gave it to us to take care of. And at the end, it says if you don't take care of the world, God is not going to look favorably on you. So, just the beginning and the end. So humanity has a health problem. We're putting on warming. We have to get on a low carbon diet. The sources of that warming come from lots of different aspects of our society, and these are just a few. We have electricity, we have industrial processes, we have fertilizers, forest burning, we have transportation, ships, trains, cars, boats, planes, and all these human activities that use energy primarily burn fossil fuels. We also have carbon dioxide coming from our farming practices and other sources that are changing the world that we live in. Well, it's hurting us, and it's hurting us in the heart, in the head, and the stomach. We're seeing heartbreaking fires and loss of property, loss of lives. We're seeing regions of the world becoming unlivable. You know, it only has to be above, I think the temperature is 134 degrees for 6 hours, and a human can't survive. So if you're in a part of the world where that is true, and more parts of the world are reaching that, I mean, that used to be the record for Death Valley. That was the world record temperature, and now it's becoming much more likely and much more common around the world. So if you live in one of those areas, you have to leave. And where are you going to go? When those people show up on our shores and other shores around the world, they create instabilities that lead to protectionist governments and world conflict. And we've already seen that happening. We've seen records exceeding 50 degrees Celsius, 122 degrees Fahrenheit, in at least 4 countries: Iran, Kuwait, Oman, and the United Arab Emirates. Portland, Oregon this last year, just June 28th, reached a record of 116 degrees Fahrenheit. Portland, where few people have air conditioners because they haven't needed them. The world is changing. Seattle, another place where you don't need air conditioning, or you didn't, reached 108 degrees Fahrenheit, and that lasted for a long time. We're seeing tremendous growth in the power of hurricanes. These so-called bomb storms, where they pass over an excessively warm area of hot water, warm water evaporating from the surface of the ocean, That's the fuel for hurricanes. And imagine just dumping a bunch of gasoline on a fire, it just explodes. So we're seeing rapid acceleration of the power of hurricanes as they pass over these areas, and then we're seeing tremendous destruction. This one in the Bahamas, Hurricane Dorian, stalled over the Bahamas for 40 hours, dropping 60 inches of rain. You know, Hurricane Harvey hit the Houston area and the Louisiana area. It dumped 54 inches of rain. This is 60 inches of rain. That's an amazing amount. This, Argentina, and this isn't the only place in the world this has happened, that's 1.5 meters of hail that fell in 15 minutes. You know, we've had hailstorms in the past, but we're seeing more and more of these really freaky events that are powered by the increasing energy, which is the fuel for weather. Nashville, Tennessee, that's a fire truck in the water. Who's coming to save us? We have to save ourselves. And this is ironic. This, of course, is an attraction that was never meant to float. But they had tremendous rains that caused $1 million worth of damage, and they're suing because there was too much rain. Hello. But the hardest part is that the areas of the world where they don't have the resource to adapt, they can't go out and buy air conditioners, they don't have the electricity, they don't have the capability to save themselves. They're the ones who are suffering first and suffering the most. This is a very interesting graphic here that shows that we aren't any more protected. This browning of the country is because of the increasing temperature. You know, here in Minnesota, when I was a student of meteorology, as I recall, we got 24 inches of precipitation in the Twin Cities per year. Now that number's 28. We're getting more precipitation, but we're also getting more heat, and the heat evaporates that precipitation faster. And the rain is coming down in these megastorms where you meet certain criteria of the extent and the quantity, and it's called a megastorm. Those come and you get a big chunk of your rain, and then you go through periods of drought. So it's getting harder to farm in Minnesota, and this is going to the end of the century. It's going to get harder yet. So what's the prescription? What's the doctor's recommendation? Every sector of humanity needs treatments. And these again are the sectors that we need to focus on. And I would recommend that when we think about what to do, we should focus on the low-hanging fruit. There's a rule of thumb that says you get 80% of the benefit for 20% of the work. And we should focus on that. You know, we'd like to be purists and say, well, I'm never going to X or I'm never going to Y, because those are contributing. But if they don't make a big difference, it isn't going to be enough. So let's focus on the things we can get done and do them fast. And we're seeing some of those things happening already. These are the major areas of contributing to greenhouse gas. And at the top, back in the early 2000s, electricity was the highest contributor of greenhouse gases, but that has been dropping thanks to solar and wind, and transportation is rising. So we've got still the number one and number two, but we're seeing one go in the right direction and one go in the wrong direction. And the other ones too, they're increasing largely because of population growth. So we need some solutions that we can apply across the board. You know, there's another saying that a moment on the lips, a lifetime on the hips. And it's true with fossil fuels too. It's very convenient and very cheap to burn fossil fuels. But there is a millennium of impact from that. Every pound of carbon dioxide is going to have an impact on the world for 1,000 years. So if we're going to mitigate those problems in reasonable numbers of years, we're going to have to figure out a way to take that carbon dioxide back out of the air. So when you look at the cost of burning fossil fuels, if you're not paying attention to those negative externalities, the downstream effects of that pound of carbon dioxide, or that ton, or gigatons of carbon dioxide that humanity is putting into the air, then you're not doing a good job. The easiest and cheapest way to reduce carbon is to simply not burn it in the first place. Once again, I know that a lot of people focus on electricity, so I included this graph to show you the trend. That bottom gray area is coal. And you can see that it peaked in the early 2000s and has been coming down, and it's going down dramatically. But what's largely filling in its place is natural gas. Now, natural gas is cleaner than coal. Some of the traditional pollutants are much cleaner. But as far as carbon dioxide, it's only about half as bad, so it's still a big problem. But above that, in the green and the blue, we see wind and solar. The green is wind and solar, the blue is nuclear. We're seeing growth in those, and we have a lot of potential for those to grow even more. Now, as we move forward and this electricity gets greener, we're going to have an opportunity to have a big impact by electrifying more things. Electrifying transportation, electrifying anything we use fossil fuels for today, with the anticipation, if it isn't already here, that we're going to see greener and greener electricity, and we're going to ride this wave toward a cleaner environment. So what's the goal? The Earth could support life in perpetuity, or for as long as we could imagine. So we need to preserve that, but we're robbing the Earth of that capability. Why should we do it? Well, it's a mandate from God. When should we do it? Well, it would have been good to start about 40 years ago, when the scientists stood up and said this is a real problem. And there was, for a while, some political movement, but once the economics became known, people started to resist it. Today, we've squandered 40 years of opportunity. It just gets harder every day, so we need to move quickly, no time to waste. So preserving the life-sustaining qualities of the Earth, well, first of all, natural systems are the best. People talk about, well, maybe we can geoengineer and we can solve these problems by filling the atmosphere with things that reflect sunlight. Well, there's side effects to these things. And so the best systems are the natural systems that were in balance before humanity started changing them. And they're very rich in complexity. So there's things that we don't even know about that natural systems are already doing. And we don't understand the side effects of what we attempt. But we have technology today to move back toward that natural environment. And we will innovate. But, once the economic situation is tilted in favor of solving these problems, we will innovate. Who? Everyone. We need everyone to be involved. And so that's a particular challenge that I'm trying to address today, is how can you and everyone become more involved? And that requires a better understanding, that you can feel comfortable talking about it. And really, at the end, I'm going to give you a preview of the end. Go to the back of the chapter, back of the book, and read the ending. The big ask is for you to talk about it. Just talk about it with your family and your friends, and these things will happen. So today we're going to talk about EnROADS. Now, EnROADS is a wonderful little tool. It's kind of like a pocket calculator for climate science. I had this calculator when I was in college that had all these fancy functions on it, and I could sit there and play with these complex formulas to better understand some of the technology I was learning about. And I would just play with that thing. I'd plug in numbers and see where it led me. What's particularly rewarding is that my 8-year-old grandson is doing the same thing today with his calculator on his iPad. Just playing with numbers. He thinks it's funny when the thing says error. So EnROADS has built into it all of the, or not all of, obviously not all of it, but a very large amount of what we know about climate science, together with what we know about economics, about business, about human activities, about farming. It's all rolled into a system dynamics modeling tool, which tries to take into account all of the interactions between things. It takes its information from heavy-duty models that have been used to analyze what we know about the natural world. And so it's based on and calibrated by that heavy-duty work that's been done. But it's a very easy-to-use tool that runs very quickly in an ordinary browser. And we're going to be playing with that today. We're going to try some scenarios. And I just wanted to point out that when you came in, you might have received one of these simulation guidelines that describe 7 sectors of society. And each of you or each party should have gotten one copy to look at, just to start thinking about what are the different sectors of society need to do. And when we come to working with the EnROADS model, if you can't think of something that you're concerned about or that you understand or would like to understand better, you can refer to this document. So for instance, you might be in the energy production industry. You might be working for an electricity company or oil company. There's a sheet for that. You might be a rapidly emerging nation or a well-developed nation, or you might be in industry and commerce. Those are some of the scenarios that are out there. So I want to talk a little bit about, just what is modeling, scientific modeling. It's really quite simple. You take what scientists have been able to discern from experiments, and then you explode them with lots and lots of data, and you try to cover the whole globe. The weather model does this. They take readings from thermometers around the world. They take pressure readings, and they take all these readings and they plug them into this supercomputer. And the thing, it has a huge amount of memory, so it can basically encompass the whole world in this model. And then it just takes little steps. And each step moves it ahead of them, an instant in time. And then after a certain number of cycles of the computer, they've got a forecast for 6 hours, and then 12 hours, and then 18 hours, 24 hours, maybe up to 10 days, right? That's a model that we use a lot. We get weather forecasts every day. I look every morning when I get up to see what to expect and plan for the day. Now we know the models aren't perfect, but they go a lot farther than the human brain can go on its own. And the reason they're not perfect is because of variability in the real world. But they can help us to understand what we know a little better. And then as we gain more knowledge, we can improve the model and we can make predictions and play the odds a little bit in deciding what we're going to do. So are we going to build on these barrier islands? Well, we can see where things are headed, and the barrier islands, they're on their way up. And where should we build? Where should we put our resources? What kind of systems do we need to build to anticipate the future? That's what models do for us. I'll give you an example of a really simple model. Have you ever tried to predict when you're going to get somewhere? Let's say you're driving from here to Chicago, all right? Would you start out at 6 o'clock in the evening? Probably not, because you're not going to get to Chicago until at least after midnight, depending on how fast you drive. And, it's going to be uncomfortable to try and finish the trip. So you do a little bit of a calculation. That's a model. Now, the model is not perfect, because what if you decide to stop and have lunch along the way, right? But we try to make the models as good as we can, and you try to take things into account. So, you use Google Maps to help you figure out when you're going to get to Chicago. It actually has input. It has data from places along the way. It knows where the road construction is, where you might end up taking a detour. And for the moment anyway, it knows where there's stoppages. If there's a crowd heading into the last few miles of Chicago, it can actually take that into account. So that's a little better model. So models are useful, even if they're not 100% accurate. So in this context, that's what I think of as a model. And in this context, what I think of as a simulation is to take that information and plug it into a tool that takes all of the data and interactions that we've learned about from the models, and it builds it into a simulator so that you can then play with it. Say, okay, well, what if we invest heavily in wind technology? Or what if we tax coal? Or what if we change our farming practices? And the model includes things like, well, what if we slow down population? I don't know how you do that. But what if we slow down the economy? What would that have effect? What effect would that have? And these are the kind of things we can play with. So let me switch to the EnROADS model. I need to do a little technical stuff here. Okay. Yeah, that's good. All right, what we have here is something that runs, as I said, it runs in a browser, and you can play with it. Everybody can try this out. Once you leave here, maybe you'll have enough information that you'll feel comfortable going and trying some of these knobs. So over on the left side, we have energy supply. Coal, oil, natural gas, those are the fossil fuels. We have bioenergy and renewables, nuclear, new zero carbon. What if somebody figures out fusion energy? You know, the difference between fission energy, where you split the atom, and fusion energy, where you take two hydrogen atoms and you fuse them together. Both of them release tremendous amounts of energy. The former we know how to do, and we have power plants around the world. The latter we haven't been able to figure out. But what if we figured it out? What if someday they actually figured that out? How would that help? We could get rid of fossil fuels and just have this new fusion energy. And then at the bottom of the energy column over there on the left side is the carbon price. Now, carbon price simply says you make it more expensive to use fossil fuels. Okay, so we talked about how when you burn a fossil fuel, it's pretty inexpensive, it's pretty convenient. We've got a lot of infrastructure built up around that. So, you know, I pay $3, I get a gallon of gas, or $3.20. Get a gallon of gas, I can drive 25 miles on average. That's what an average car gets. But what's the cost after I burn that? All right, that's what this tries to take into account, this carbon price. It says we're going to make it harder and harder and harder, but gradually, all right? We're going to put a gentle pressure on the economy to steer it away from fossil fuels. And if that's a solid thing that doesn't come and go with the political shifting of the winds, then industry is going to realize that that's where they need to be going with their investments. So if we have consistency and we have this gradually increasing pressure, it won't be a big shock to the economy, but we'll see people moving away. So when you go to the marketplace and you want to decide on something, you're going to look at things on the shelf that you want, and you're going to look at the price. You've got two things there, one that uses a lot of carbon and it costs more, and one that doesn't use much carbon and it costs less. If they both do the same thing, well, you're going to choose the one that uses less carbon. And so we will change society without making people wear a hair shirt. Hey, people know what that is, hair shirt? I've been surprised that that's actually something. It's where you put something on just to feel the pain of it. If you're an ascetic, I guess. But people don't feel, normally people don't act that way. They want to be comfortable, and they'll eat both marshmallows. So in the middle, we have some of the uses of energy. We have transportation, and it's broken down into how efficient is that transportation and how much is it electrified. And then buildings and industry. How efficient is it? How much is it powered by electricity? And then down at the bottom, there's population and economic growth. These are all individually broken out so that you can slide them independently and really drill down and figure out, okay, what has an effect and what doesn't really have an effect. It might have a lot of appeal because it sounds good. Yes?
Could you explain electrification to us?
So electrification of transportation, for example, you can buy a car that runs on gas, or you can buy a car that runs on electricity. Electrification of buildings, you might have a gas furnace that warms your house, Or you might have a heat pump that runs on electricity. Okay, so again, if the electricity is getting cleaner and you electrify the uses of energy, then it's you're heading in the right direction. You automatically get cleaner as time goes on. And over here on the far right, some of the other places that emit greenhouse gases, we're cutting down forests around the world at a tremendous rate. And we have a lot of practices that release methane in addition to cows, which belch methane. It's part of their digestive process. And other ruminants. We have the mining of fossil fuels, of petroleum and natural gas. Some of that stuff leaks out. Some of it leaks out at the well. Some of it leaks out in transportation. I mean, I was visiting my daughter in Boston, and we got off the bus around the corner from her house, and I smelled gas. And I said, there's a problem here. That sewer could blow up. She goes, Dad, that's like that all over Boston. They have very leaky pipes, and everywhere you go in Boston, you smell that gasoline, that natural gas smell. Imagine the cost of fixing that, but imagine the harm that's doing as that leaks out. And then at the very end here, we have some opportunities for how we could actually remove carbon from the environment. Afforestation means we plant trees, or we do better farming practices that reduce the release of carbon. And maybe we come up with some inventions, some technology that can actually suck carbon out of the air. So, on the top left here we have where we're getting our energy from. These are in unfathomable numbers. An exajoule is something like 10 to the, it's either 10 to the 21st or 10 to the, it's like a 10 with 21 zeros after it. I'm forgetting, is it 10 to the 21st or 10 to the 18th? Anyway, a joule is a very small amount of energy. It's 1 watt for 1 second. 1 kilowatt hour, which that's what you pay on your bill, you pay about 13 cents for. A kilowatt hour is 3.6 million joules. So exajoules per year. You got to sit down with a piece of paper and a pencil. But the bottom one here, the brown, that's coal. Then red is oil. Blue is natural gas. Green is renewables. That includes hydro as well as wind and solar. And bioenergy, burning of down trees. We do some of that around here, you know. When there's a storm and there's a bunch of trees that got blown down, they actually get burned for energy. And then this little thin blue sliver at the top is nuclear. Then on the right, we have the amount of greenhouse gases we're emitting. And you'll see that there's a black line that's coated with a blue line, right? The black line is the status quo. This is where the models say we're headed. The blue line is what happens after we make changes to these sliders and we see the effect. So for example, let's say that I subsidize coal, make it even cheaper. You see the blue line departs a little bit from the black line. It's a little bit higher. And you might have noticed that there was a little bit of movement over on the left side. And I can play this in a loop. So you can see it. Brown is compressing, expanding, compressing, expanding. Well, it's not working very well. How about renewables? Let's heavily subsidize renewables. That green area gets a lot bigger. Oh, I used the wrong button, that's why. All right, is the green getting bigger? Because we subsidize renewables. And you can see the blue line departing from the red line. And then over here on the far right, we have what happens to the temperature at the end of the century. This whole model is based on 1 century, from 2000 to 2100. Okay? So we went from an expected warming of 3.6 degrees, or 6.2 degrees, 6.5 degrees Fahrenheit. We dropped that down to 6.2 degrees Fahrenheit by heavily subsidizing renewable energy. Why didn't that solve all the problem? Well, remember, all of these things are broken out into separate controls. So if you don't change how you drive your cars, if you don't change how you power industry in your buildings, If you don't change anything else, well, you're displacing a little bit of electricity from coal and other fossil fuels. But you're not taking full advantage of that, okay? So I'll give you all an opportunity now. If somebody has something you've heard about that you think is interesting, would you shout it out as a possible solution to climate change that you might have heard over the last few years?
Increasing the price of carbon.
Increasing the price of carbon. So let's do this a little bit. And it's actually a pretty dramatic change in the sources of energy. You see a shrinking of coal in particular, a little bit of shrinking of natural gas, a growing of renewables, the green, and the others, the oil, the nuclear, the bioenergy, they pretty much stay the same. Well, oil is a fossil fuel. Why didn't it change? Because we use it for transportation. And if you don't change the transportation, you've got a requirement for that oil. If it keeps getting more expensive, you're just going to make people angry. If there's a way for people to get off of oil for transportation, then they might be happy because they're going to see, oh, I have an opportunity to save money. Make sense?
But you didn't move it very far, Bill.
I didn't move it very far, and we did see, even though I moved it just a little bit, we got a 0.3 degrees C difference in the temperature at the end of the century. So I'll move it a little farther. More. 0.5 degrees C. And we're seeing a more dramatic compression of especially coal. Move it more. Coal keeps shrinking. Natural gas is shrinking too. But that oil is just like, that's uncompressible there, right? The oil just stays. So we need to figure out how to address that. There is some compression of the oil. Another thing that's kind of interesting, yeah, you can see the oil is compressing somewhat, but not nearly as much as we'd like it to. And even the natural gas, we could do some things perhaps with energy efficiency and with electrification that would cause those to shrink as well. But one of the things that's kind of interesting is you notice that there's a decline in those things and then there's a rebound. It starts to come up again. The blue gets a little bigger. So we had a dropping of energy from those fossil fuels and then a rebound. Why do you think that is? Population growth. Okay, so we have more and more people and we have countries being developed and moving into modern society, which requires more energy. Okay? So, what you said that? All right, let's go ahead and do that. Let's put a medium carbon price on here. That's probably even pretty aggressive to figure, to assume that that's going to be possible politically. And then let's electrify a little bit and watch the red. Now it's coming down. We still need a lot of oil for buildings and industry. Now, I'll just take a pause here. Look how big this renewable energy segment has become. Because as we electrified, we increased the opportunity to use that electricity instead of something else, that clean energy from electricity. And now, if I say, all right, I want to incentivize renewables, and I'm just going to go all the way to the maximum here, we see a little bit more growth, but not as dramatic as if we didn't have a carbon price. So a lot of the benefit is coming from the carbon price, and further incentivizing renewables doesn't change that much.
How about less consumption?
Less consumption, making things more energy efficient.
No, not necessarily. Just less consumption, period.
Okay.
Smaller. Less.
Less economic growth.
Probably.
Because there's a pretty tight correlation between energy consumption and economic growth. So yeah, if we slow down the economy, we can see a dramatic reduction in the amount of energy we use. But what's interesting is if we take care of those things with other means, so we put a high carbon price, we do a lot of electrification. Now if we slow down the economy, how much of a difference does it make? Well, it's still. But it's less than what it was without those other things.
The clean energy drops a lot when you slow down the economy.
When you slow down the economy, yeah. I've experimented with this where I have used all the knobs I can think of that directly affect carbon dioxide or greenhouse gases. And then I play with population, and what's really interesting is if you solve all these other problems, then the population isn't that big of a factor. I mean, there's other reasons why there's limits on population that we might be concerned about. But we don't have to reduce the population to manage climate change. There's a whole bunch of other things that are in this program. We have lots of different output graphs. We have each graph has an explanation of what it does, but carbon dioxide emissions by source, cumulative carbon dioxide emissions. Now in this graph we see two dotted lines. The lower dotted line is for 1.5 degrees C temperature rise, and the top line is 2 degrees C temperature rise. Our goal is to certainly keep it below 2 degrees C, but in order to avoid some of the worst impacts of climate change, we want to keep it below 1.5 degrees C. And so as we do these experiments and try to change the blue line, we'd like to see the blue line stay below these dotted lines. So let's again play with those. Nice carbon price. See, now we're actually below 2 degrees C. Built into this tool, there's a lot of knowledge about how economics works. So for example, if we invented this new zero carbon technology, it takes a while before you can ramp up to where it makes a significant difference in society. So this orange, or whatever color it is up there, it's kind of a darker than orange. That's the new zero carbon. It takes a while for that to ramp up. We see here by 2040 that we've really made little impact. But you get out to 2060 and now business, industry has been able to ramp up the production of the resources that are needed for an industry like that. So you see here in the light gray, yeah, that's great, a 66% chance, 2/3 chance of 2 degree or 1.5 degrees C, represented by these gray dotted lines. So what are some of the other graphs we have here? Population and GDP, global population. Gross domestic product per capita. Energy intensity of gross domestic product. how many BTUs, how many pounds of carbon, whatever, you release or use in order to produce $1 of gross domestic product. And as you can increase energy efficiency especially, you can have a big impact on that. So again, you can have a strong, vibrant economy and solve climate change. Other ideas? Renewables. So if we heavily subsidize renewables, we increase the area of the green. Oops. Let me reset this. Just want to do that by itself and loop on that. Let's go back to the graph that shows us carbon dioxide emissions. So we reduce the carbon dioxide a little bit, enough to lower the temperature rise by 2 degrees Celsius. So an all-out effort to build more renewables isn't going to solve it by itself. And one of the things that I hear a lot of people talking about is nuclear. I mean, nuclear sounds like a big win. It produces very little carbon dioxide. Most of the carbon dioxide comes from building the plants. They use a lot of concrete. And from the mining of the uranium ores. But it never grows to be much of a factor in the solution and has really a very small effect on the temperature at the end of the century. Why is that? Well, first of all, it's the most expensive kind of electricity we can get. And a lot of people think that that can be solved, but I haven't seen the signs of that yet, so I think it's going to be difficult for us to displace a lot of fossil fuels with nuclear energy. It can only be, yes? We've had a problem with the disposal of waste ever since the beginning, and it doesn't look like anybody's jumping forward to solve that problem quickly. There are technologies that are new types of fission reactors that actually consume the waste and produce less dangerous waste. And so some people are touting those, but there's a long development time and a long ramping up time for those. So yes, go ahead, pursue those technologies. They may become very important in the future, but I wouldn't count on them today, especially when we have wind and solar, which we know works today, and it's a good solution, right? So let's build out. Let's use that low-hanging fruit 80-20 rule and take advantage of what we've got as quickly as we can, because we have no time to waste.
So when the model ramps up renewables, does it account for the change in the possible economic growth due to the subsidization of renewables, the taxes, the carbon tax? I mean, does it account for that, or is that held steady economic growth?
That's a good question. So if there's money being invested as subsidies, does that affect GDP? Well, there's already tremendous subsidies that are going into the fossil fuel industry, so you have to account for that. We have, at the very top of the pyramid, we have leases being sold for far less than they're worth. We have countries around the world where they bank the profits of their fossil fuels, like Norway has this huge sovereign fund. But in the United States, and probably lots of areas around the world, the wealth of the fossil fuels goes to a relatively small number of people. So that's one form of subsidizing. There's, of course, military activity around the world, because a lot of the sourcing of fossil fuels comes from politically unstable areas of the world. And so we get involved in military conflicts to protect our resources that we need to power our economy. And if we get away from that with wind and solar, I mean, last I checked, there haven't been any attacks of North Dakota. So I don't think we have to invest a lot in the military support for North Dakota. So, and the other thing that's really pretty remarkable is we have had to subsidize wind energy in particular up to this point, but now it's really taking off on its own. There are what they call auctions for new development of energy sources, electricity sources. Auction markets where companies will come in and a country will say, we need you to build us a gigawatt of power. And a company will come in and say, I'm going to build that with wind for X dollars. And that X is lower than any other source of fuel with no subsidies. So we already are at the point where these energies are running under their own momentum. And we're continuing to see innovation. You know, one of the things about wind is when you get far enough from the ground, the wind gets really stable. And in fact, the wind energy at night is stronger than it is during the day. And this is counterintuitive for a lot of people because our experience here crawling around on the ground is that at night the wind dies. But that has to do with the mix of air. You know, the ground slows down the air, so if there isn't a mix vertically, then the wind stops at the ground level. But it's still going, and actually it's going faster aloft because it isn't losing any momentum, or it's losing a lot less momentum to the ground. So this is actually a problem for electricity companies. They build a lot of wind, and then a lot of the power they get comes at night, and what do you do with it? So you need to encourage more use of electricity during those off hours. And hey, surprise, electric cars charge at night. So there's a good win-win situation where you're charging cars that are going to not put out the carbon dioxide using this excess amount of energy that comes at night. And most electric cars that are being sold today have plenty of capacity that all you ever do is charge them at night. You never charge them during the day. You come home at the end of the day, you plug your car in, you go and you have dinner, you go to bed, watch the news, whatever. Get up the next morning and your car's full again. You never go to the gas station. It's magic. Every morning you wake up with a full tank of gas, you drive around all day, and come home at night, you still have some electricity left over, top it off again. So I was talking about how the higher you get, the more energy you get from the wind. Now they're building even bigger wind turbines. These monster wind turbines. General Electric has a program, and I forget the numbers, but they're like 50% taller than the tallest wind turbines we have now. And the higher you get, the more reliable they become, the less time they don't produce electricity. And so one of the things that people complain about with wind, renewable energies, is when the sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't blow, you don't have electricity. Well, as you get bigger, you have electricity more of the time. And there are other things you can do to manage how much electricity you're using, like charging electric cars at night, so that you have a better fit with the generation of energy and the consumption of energy. The way we've used electricity in this country and probably throughout the world is it's an all you can eat smorgasbord. Whenever you want the energy, you have as much energy as you want. And we build our systems to manage that. Well, that's expensive. I did a little back of the envelope calculation a few years ago, and I determined that we have 2.5 times more electricity generating capacity than we use. And the reason is because we build for the peak. So when you've got a hot summer day and you're running all these air conditioners, you're probably using close to 100% of your generating capacity. But then at night, maybe you're only using 10%. I mean, it's dramatic, the differences. And if we can manage the load so that we shift more load consumption of electricity to flatten out that curve, everybody wins. You invest less money, your capital is more effective. Everybody pays less for electricity. And we can use more of it because we're using it smart. That's kind of a pet thing of mine, electricity.
How about capital and infrastructure for moving the electricity around? Are we prepared for that from a renewable standpoint? And then how fast can you ramp up renewables with the capital markets that we have today?
So, those are tough questions. I'm not an economist, so I'm going to get a lot of this wrong. But what I know is that Great River Energy, which produces electricity for a lot of us here in the southern suburbs, and a lot of us in cooperatives across the whole state, they're making a major shift away from lignite, which they burn in the Coal Creek Station power plant out in North Dakota, to massive investments, or they're actually not the ones investing in it, but they're contracting with companies to buy the wind power. So there's a third party that goes out and raises the funds. They get an agreement from the electricity company to buy the power that they're going to produce. They take that agreement, the contract, a promise to pay, to the bank. The bank gives them the money to build the wind farm, and then the wind farm operates for 20, 30 years, maybe more, on that agreement, that so-called power purchase agreement. So it works like a lot of business does. You know, you have capital markets that might earn a return, and it works. There's a profit there to be had. There's also a lot of good jobs in the renewable energy industry. It is the fastest growing segment of the job market. A job for a new grad today, it's an excellent career to go into wind turbine maintenance. And what can be really nice about that too is that a lot of these jobs are out in the countryside. So if you're living in a rural community where you're seeing a shrinkage of your population, and that's worrisome to you because you'd like to maintain the culture that you have, well, here's a job where people, you know, maybe they'll drive a few miles to get to whatever wind turbine they're working on that day, but they're probably going to be able to live out in the community with you. And with Zoom and internet technology, you can live anywhere you want to, so that's a win, a lot of wins. So on your piece of paper, some of you have perhaps the climate justice hawks. You'd really like to see quick action. Or for that matter, any one of you in the sheet that you have, is there something in there that jumps out at you? I'm going to give you a second to think about that. And I'm going to talk about one that got a lot of attention here a few years ago. And I think it's still going, but I don't know that it's going far. It's called the Plant a Trillion Trees. I don't know if it's got a better name than that. But the idea is to plant so many trees that you'll cure the carbon problem, because these trees will soak up the carbon. Well, what are some of the problems with that? Land, water. I mean, presumably, if you're cutting down the Amazon rainforest, you could plant trees in the Amazon and restore the rainforest, right? Maybe. It turns out that that soil isn't very good. And so they cut down the trees, they plant them, and they only are productive a little while. And then they move on and they cut down more trees. So it isn't clear whether you can restore the forest to those areas. But you would have to displace the economy that is built up there with an economy that encourages people to preserve trees. Well, it turns out that there is an economy like that in the world. There's indigenous peoples who live in these forests. And if they're given more control over their lands, they will manage them properly. They've been doing so for thousands of years. So one of the ideas is, if you are motivated to try to offset some of the impact that you have, you might invest in a green fund that provides money to indigenous people to support their lifestyle, to help them fight off the encroachment of modern society. Let them manage those forests and keep them alive. But the reality is, okay, we got to find the land, you got to find a financial motivation for people to keep the trees there, because if they just cut down the trees, then the trees are going to decay or burn, and they're going to release that carbon back to the atmosphere. So you haven't really solved the problem. And in fact, when you plant trees, at first they're small, they don't grow a lot every year, they don't absorb that much carbon. It takes a while for them to catch up and really start to suck up a lot of carbon. But then eventually they reach the stabilization or an asymptote where the forest is in a constant cycle of new growth and death, new growth and death. So they reach a limit to how much carbon dioxide they can absorb. And then that's it, right? Unless you harvest that wood and use it in a building, which is going to be around for a while, and you've captured the carbon and kept it around, kept it out of the atmosphere for a longer period of time by preserving that wood, preserving the carbon that's trapped in the wood. Another idea that's real interesting is, this is actually a carbon capture theoretical idea, is that you grow fast-growing cellulose things, woody things, and then you harvest them and you burn them in a power plant to generate electricity, and you capture the carbon from that power plant and you inject it into the ground. And in that way, you're sucking up carbon, putting it in the ground. And you plant more trees, you suck up more carbon, put it in the ground. A lot of theoretical ideas and a lot of time to ramp these things up if they're going to work at all. Well, let's play with afforestation a little bit. So a little bit of growth, I don't see any departure from the line in carbon dioxide. Well, that's emissions. Let's look at the total carbon dioxide. Come on. Let's just do this. Reset. Does that work? Yeah. So I'm just going to slide this all the way to the end. We've done pretty much all that we think we can do with planting trees, and we've made a very small difference by the end of the century. How about if we stop cutting down the trees? Now that adds on another equal share, roughly. But it's still not enough. We're still pumping out so much carbon from all these fossil fuels that we're burning that planting trees alone isn't going to solve the problem. Did anybody get an idea of something they want to ask right now before I continue on?
About regenerative agriculture.
Well, can I ask someone else?
Yeah, you bet.
Thanks.
I'm going to ask about agricultural tilling of so much carbon being released.
That's right.
How is that compared to?
In its natural state, the soil is a tremendous sink for carbon. There's lots of dead roots and other things that are in the soil. That soil is very much alive, and there's a lot of stuff in there, right? But our farming practices, the way our farming works is we pull that carbon out and release it and essentially kill the soil. So then we end up putting a lot of fertilizer on the soil in order to make things grow. But if we go back to practices where we restore some of that, and one of the technologies is to plant tall grasses, because tall grasses have long roots, and the roots go down, and the theory that's been talked about a lot lately, regenerative farming, uses livestock to bite off the grass. And when the grass is shortened on top, the roots underneath are sloughed. So they become a sort of a semi-permanent storage of carbon down in the soil. So if we do some of those things, then yes, we could store more carbon in the soil, and there's a tremendous potential for how much we could store in the soil. I can't quantify those numbers. I don't have them off the top of my head. But this category of methane and other gases does talk about the farming aspect. So decrease or increase greenhouse gas emissions from methane, nitrous oxide, and the F gases. F gases are things like refrigerants or solvents that are used in industry, and they have a tremendous impact on climate change because they're much more potent. A molecule of sulfur hexafluoride, which is one of these F gases, is 24,000 times more heat trapping capability than a molecule of carbon dioxide. So we want to get those things out of society too. And we want to, not release the ones that are out there already. But methane is released from sources like cows, agricultural, natural gas, drilling, and waste. Nitrous oxide comes from fertilizers. This, F gases include sulfur hexafluoride and other things, PFCs, HFCs, and others that are used in industry and consumer goods. So this, unfortunately, I thought would talk about increasing the soil carbon, but I don't see that in there. I don't see that as a separate item. Plant new forests, restore old forests. As trees grow, they draw carbon out of the air, which reduces the concentration of carbon dioxide. However, without care, large-scale afforestation can compromise biodiversity and historical land rights. But definitely, farming practices that keep more carbon in the soil, and we're hearing more about low-till or no-till farming, which has that effect, but it also has the benefit of preserving the resistance to erosion. So when you turn over the soil, you have the exposure to wind and the removal of valuable topsoil, along with a lot of problems that causes. So we're seeing farmers moving away from that. And interestingly enough, one of the reasons they can do that is because of products like Roundup. So they don't have to go out there and till to get rid of the weeds, they can kill them with herbicides. Doesn't seem right, does it?
Which is an argument against organic.
Yes. Yes, that's a whole discussion too.
Replace the use of Roundup with continuous killing of the soil.
Mm. Yes?
I wondered about the effect of not eating meat and dairy, that kind of effect, that's related to that at all?
Yes, that's definitely here in this methane and other category. So decreasing the use of animals that produce methane is going to decrease methane, right? So if you cut down on meat consumption, that can have a pretty dramatic effect. Here's greenhouse gas emissions, because now we're not talking about carbon dioxide, we're talking about methane. So that's pretty dramatic. There are a lot of products that are under development, some already on the market, that produce meat-like experience without having a living animal. Some of them actually grow animal tissue in a lab-like situation where they provide all the resources that are necessary for the muscle to grow without the animal. But then there's products like the Impossible Burger, which are made with grains, and they've developed some pretty interesting techniques to make them taste just like ground beef. I happen to like the Impossible Whopper. I think it tastes pretty darn good. I actually think it tastes better than the real Whopper because there isn't so much gristle in it. But otherwise it tastes just like beef. But maybe the better thing to do is to just change your diet away from beef and just learn to eat other foods. Yes?
You mentioned earlier capturing the carbon. And that way I would suppose would be technological carbon removal. How would that, if that was the truth, how would that change the whole?
Yes, now there's a really interesting article that came out just a few days ago about the world's largest carbon capture system that was opened up in Iceland, where they can take advantage of natural geothermal energy, renewable or sustainable energy, to power this system of sucking carbon dioxide out of the air with a absorption method. They absorb it, and then they heat the absorption material, and then it releases pure carbon dioxide, and then they compress it and they pump it into the basalt, volcanic rock that so much of Iceland is built on, probably all of Iceland is built on. And that very quickly turns into rock, a different kind of rock, but it works with the basalt. So this unit, the largest in the world, has a cost of $1,500 per ton of carbon to pull the carbon out of the air directly with technological capture. That ton of carbon, the amount of electricity that gets generated that releases that much carbon, is worth about $75. So you're talking about a 20-fold additional cost to pull the carbon out from burning it in the first place. Now, technological solutions might work, they might have some benefit, but I also calculated that you would need 2,400 of those just to keep up with one gigawatt power plant that burns coal. And there's about 1,000 times that much carbon-fired electricity in the world. And so you would need 2.4 million of those world's largest carbon capture facilities. But let's assume that somebody figures out a better way. And some of the ways that this can be done are actually to enhance natural carbon sinks, because there are natural carbon sources in the world. They come out of volcanoes. The movement of Earth into the ground with plate tectonics, and then the movement of Earth out of the ground through volcanoes, that's part of the carbon cycle. It's a very slow part of the carbon cycle, but it's actually part of the carbon cycle. So we have carbon being taken out by natural processes, and so we can enhance some of those processes. So maybe we don't have to build those machines. Maybe there's other technologies. But if we push them out, again, maxing out the growth, go back to carbon dioxide here, net carbon dioxide emissions, we can have an effect, but we reach an asymptote and we can't keep growing it. There's a limit to, the scientists have observed that there's a limit to how far we can take that technology.
Why aren't you taking down coal and oil at this time? I mean, if we're doing better on other things, wouldn't we be using them the last coal and oil?
So if we're getting close to the end here, so I'm going to cut to the chase, and I'm going to show how you can get down below those lines, those 1.5 degree lines. And there's those lines. So this is the amount of carbon that's going into the air and staying in the air. All right? So we have to flatten that curve and bring it down in order to get to where we want to go. We're here in 2021, where it's 2,294 gigatons of carbon dioxide that have been released since the start of the industrial age. We get out here to 2100, it's 66, close to 6,600 billion tons. It's over 6,600. So that's a tripling between now and the end of the century. So we have our work cut out for us, all right? Let's kick that carbon price up. That alone has a huge effect. And we can do that today. We can start on that track today. Remember, it starts out small and it grows. Stable, predictable. Business can bank on it. They know where things are headed. And the pressure just keeps getting better, stronger pressure, but it's moving people in the direction they want to go. and probably the most painless way of doing it. Economists love this technique. All right, so do that, push the carbon price. Then let's be as energy efficient as we can. And buildings actually are, people often overlook buildings in industry, but they have a dramatic effect. And then let's electrify everything because we're getting cleaner and cleaner electricity. Okay? So now we reach the point where we are actually staying below that 2 degree C line. We're above the 1.5 degree C line, but we are still growing. We're still continuing to add carbon dioxide. So now we need to start looking at other things. Let's try to reduce the deforestation a little bit. Let's try to restore some forests. But let's put a lot of effort into controlling these so-called F gases and methane because they have a pretty big effect. And I need to go to a different graph for that. Impacts. So now we're looking at the temperature change. So now we need to start pulling things out, pulling more carbon dioxide out, and head us in a trend where we're back toward a cooling and maybe a restoring of the kind of environment that humanity has been living with for at least 8,000 years. Think about that. All that we know, the oldest pyramids are about 8,000 years old. Humanity came down from the trees and stepped out into the modern world somewhere around 10, 20,000 years ago and developed to the point where we started to have permanent records in the form of antiquities about 8,000 years ago. During that 8,000 years, our climate has been remarkably stable. And now we are very dramatically pushing it out of that stable range. It is shocking when you see it in the full totality of all that time because it just takes off like a rocket. And we're heading in one direction. So this starts putting us back onto a natural environment that we've built our wealth, we've built our populations, we've built our whole society on a stable environment. And we don't know what the future holds. We don't know if we can survive a 6.5 degree warmer world, which is likely. This 3.6 degree world, that's actually a pretty conservative estimate. We have not kept up with the Paris agreements. Almost no countries have met their commitments. And we're doing more damage day by day. It's increasing. Did you know that half of all the fossil fuels that have been burned by society have been burned since 1990? And what was the start of the industrial age? 250 years ago? So in the last 30 years, you know, there's a little story that goes, if you have one amoeba and it splits every day, you get 2 amoeba the second day, 4 the next day, 8 the next day. And you're in a little dish that can handle 4 billion of these things. It takes you 32 days to get to 4 billion by splitting every day. How many days do you think it takes to get to 500 million? Or half of that, 2 billion? 31 days. Kind of sad, isn't it? If you cut everything in half at the rate we're going, it's just a little while till we're back to where we are. Okay. Enough with the depressing stuff. Any more questions?
Bill, I have one here from
Yes.
someone. And I think the idea, it says, doesn't electrification depend on how the electricity is generated?
Yes.
So I think they're talking about how some of these things impact other areas.
Right. Right.
Can you repeat the question?
So the question is, if we switch to electricity, so-called beneficial electrification, and we see it in this chart here, we've got these transport buildings, electrifying those. Doesn't that depend on the kind of source of energy that we use to generate the electricity? And it absolutely does. If we continue to build new coal-fired power plants, then that's not a good thing. But that's not the direction we're headed. We're seeing that we're building less and less, and actually, I think I heard just a few days ago that China has said they will build no more coal-fired power plants in the world outside of China. Which, you know, we've all heard about how much they're building inside of China, but they're saying now we've been going out to developing countries and working our politics with them by building them power plants, and we're just not going to do any more coal-fired power plants. So take away all the politics of the United States, and you see the world is moving in the right direction. And that's because it's, you know, renewable energies are the cheapest source of energy. Once you've made the investment, there's almost no cost to continually getting more and more electricity. So I think that we can all assume today that if we change over to electric, so if we have a gas car and get an electric car, that's going to have a benefit immediately today. That's already known, and that's another talk. But it's going to get better every year, because every year we're seeing more fossil fuel plants either not being built or being used in smaller quantities. Now that's another thing that's really interesting about the electric industry, is that you need a mix of sources so that you have diversification, so you don't have all your eggs in one basket. But the reality is that on a daily basis, you're going to use the one that costs the least, right? And so if you've got some backup generating capability that runs on natural gas, but natural gas is more expensive than the wind, you're going to take as much energy as you can from the wind, and then to make that clean, reliable electricity, you add a little bit more from fossil fuels. And that again is that 80-20 rule. You know, let's not be purists and say that there has to be zero fossil fuels if we don't know how to do that yet. I think eventually we will. We'll be able to have 100% renewable energy when we have a well-managed load. Imagine if you had most of the time cars are just sitting parked. Imagine if they're always plugged in, so that whenever you have energy, you can send the energy into those cars. And, you know, you hear people talking about how expensive it is to build battery storage for electricity, for renewable energy. Well, the batteries are already in the cars. Use the cars, right? So if we have a smart grid and we can send the energy into places that can use it whenever we have it, and then back off when we don't, then we can still have that reliable energy. But it's a mix. It's a mix anyway. And it's getting cleaner. And you can find this information easily by Googling for the carbon content of electricity in Minnesota. And you can see the trend. But Great River Energy, again, has made a commitment that by 2024, they were going to be 92% carbon free in their electricity. That's just 3 years away. Paula.
Just one last question. I'm wondering about, like, these are a lot of big picture things, and we're a group of 40 or 50 people, and I'm sure a lot of us are already doing things like maybe composting or thinking that, oh, we'll buy an electric car next time we get one, or things like that. But I'm getting the idea we have to move faster, and I'm getting the idea that we need to have organized policies in our towns and cities and states. And so do you have any advice about that?
So what can we do as individuals, I think is the gist of that, right? We all probably have something we like to do that is its own reward. I really like composting. I like the fact that there's a drop-off station just a couple miles from my house, and I can stop at Kirk Carlson's house, which is halfway, and give it to him, and then he can take it the rest of the way. No, that doesn't work. I like that, and that is its own reward. I don't feel like I deserve a reward for doing that. I believe that everything has to be that way. There's an interesting psychological experiment that if you ask people, and this was actually done, people were asked to do something altruistic, and then they were offered a plate of cookies. And then a control group was not asked to do anything, they were just offered a plate of cookies. The people who did something altruistic took more cookies. They felt like they deserved a reward. And another example is people who take reusable shopping bags to the grocery stores have been observed to put more goodies in those bags. Again, they feel like they deserve a reward. And if we, again, getting back to that hair shirt, if we expect people to make a sacrifice to solve this problem, I don't think we ever can solve it. But the good news is we don't need to make sacrifices to solve this problem. I know a lot of people, I've had an electric car since 2012 and I love it. It is a different way of using things, but you know what? When I was a teenager, I learned how to not run out of gas. And I've learned how to manage my electric car to get the things done that I want to get done. So that's not a problem, but it is its own reward. It's fun to drive, it has a lot of advantages. So we need to focus on changing people's mindset. You know, a lot of people fear a loss, that this is going to hurt. You know, how many people know the story Running Man? Dustin Hoffman was in the movie, and there's this guy who was a Nazi, it's supposed to be Mengele, Dr. Mengele, and he's drilling into Dustin Hoffman's teeth. And he says, "Is it safe? Is it safe?" And Dustin Hoffman is a patsy. He has no idea what's going on. He doesn't know what's safe. And this hurts, right? And I feel for some people, it's like, is it green? Is it green? You know, have you suffered enough yet? That's not the right way to do this. We need to convince people that it'll be a fun place to be, that it'll be a better place to be, and that it'll be its own reward. So talk about it. You don't have to know that much about it. Just express your own feelings. Tell your friends that you're thinking about making a change and why you think that's going to be a good thing for you. And then just stick in there, you know, we need to solve this problem. So thank you for coming tonight.
How do people get a hold of this? You said that
climateinteractive.org, very simple website name, climateinteractive, one word, .org. And then you'll see a button on there that says EnROADS, E-N-R-O-A-D-S. You're a couple clicks away from it, and then this comes up. You can run this on a computer in any web browser. It does not run on an iPad or a smartphone or smart tablet. It has to have a computer. But it's free. And as I said, every one of these has a description under these, the little flippy arrow on the left here that explains what it is. So as you're walking around through this stuff, you don't have to go looking somewhere else to find out what does this mean? What are we talking about? Thank you very much.
Also, if you're interested, just a reminder again, the InterFaith Creation Care Group is open to anyone. And if you're interested in joining us as we put on programs like this, please sign up at the table back here. Also, we have a table over here on electrifying our school bus fleets locally. This is something that we're going to the school boards locally and talking about. And we're seeing a growing interest, and there's funding for electric school buses available. So if you're interested in that at all, stop by that table over there. Learn a little bit about it, even if it's not something that maybe you can work on right now. Just maybe learn about it. There's some stuff you can download onto your phone to learn about it. There's a poster over there. So, anything else, Chris?
No, just to thank you again for coming, but we do need to get out of here by 8:15. So go ahead and take a look at the tables and stuff, but thank you for coming. Thank you very much.
Yeah.